This lesson is on Unit 2, Lesson 1, about the Articles of Confederation. So, during this time in history, so in the early 1700s, there was the Declaration of Independence. It was written and agreed to. And of course, we remember at this time in the lesson, we've already looked at the Declaration of Independence. We've already kind of thought through what it's saying, what it means. It was essentially separating from Great Britain, written by Thomas Jefferson. There's a replica of the house where Jefferson wrote it. This is a famous painting. This is Jefferson, this is John Adams, and this is Ben Franklin. And these three together helped to work on the draft. Okay, so this is the famous painting of them signing the Declaration and deciding they're, bringing it before the Congress, and they decided. And now, of course, that paper is on display. But what this means is essentially this. After the Declaration, the United States was really a bunch of different states. They were all completely disconnected from each other. Each one of them had their own currency, like our own standard of money. They had they each had their own armies or militias. They had their own system of taxation, their own everything was individual. There were really 13 countries. And after the Declaration of Independence and when we won the Revolutionary War, there was this question, what do we do now? We've got rid of the king. Now we're independent. What do we do next? And so that's where the Articles of Confederation came in. The Articles of Confederation was a document. It was originally the first government in America. It was set up right after the Declaration of Independence was signed. But it took a long time for it to get ratified. You'll notice in the notes that it says for about 10 years. Why did I put about? Because it took a super long time for the Articles of Confederation to finally get ratified by all of the states. And the word ratified means approved. So all the states had to approve of it. During this time, during that decade or so between while we had the Articles of Confederation, there was a great economic upheaval. The king is no longer in charge. Our trade with Britain collapsed, which was a huge cornerstone of our economy. The money was a huge problem. We have these terrible continentals is what they were called, and it was really a mess. Our young country almost dissolved. The articles were written, like I said before, it took a long time to get ratified. They were actually agreed on by the Congress in 1777, but they were not fully ratified until 1781. So for essentially, these 4 years or so, there was no government. They were using the articles, but they technically weren't ratified yet. Now, under the Articles of Confederation, Congress had some specific powers, and you can see them all listed here. Obviously the most important ones, build a navy, have an army, but look at how they can have an army by asking the states for troops. So basically they say, please, Virginia, give us some troops to fight. But if Virginia doesn't want to, they don't have to. Now, the states also had some obligations under the Articles of Confederation, but you couldn't force the state to do these. States should obey Congress. They were supposed to provide funds. They were supposed to be fair to other citizens. They were supposed to surrender fugitives. Where do you think that became a problem? Yep, South versus North. The South had slaves, and so what do we do with fugitive slaves who run away? Any kind of disputes were supposed to go to Congress, but the Congress, the federal government, was essentially powerless to enforce these. Of the times of the Articles of Confederation, there were some major problems with land. You can read this more here, but essentially what happened was states held land and they wanted to hold on to it. And so the one thing that the Articles of Confederation basically did well is they figured out the land problem. They got the 13 colonies to let go of these land claims that they had made and turned these land claims into states, or they were on their way to becoming states, which are now the states of like Ohio and Michigan. So you can read more about that here. The Land Ordinance of 1785 basically figured out how to divide the land in the West. Again, this is on a different land bill that they passed, but this Northwest Ordinance of 1787 figured out a way to become a state. It outlined the steps for statehood. And it also did something else. It ensured that states that began, like new states that happened, were going to be no slavery. There wasn't going to be slavery. So that also is kind of a blow. That sort of sets the tone also for the Civil War, because we remember that this is later going to be a dispute. But this original law passed under the Articles of Confederation said there would be no slavery in these new states. And so today, these areas of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, this whole kind of north is what this was about, the Northwest Territory. That's the bill. All right, what were some of the weaknesses in the Confederation? There were lots of weaknesses. First of all, each state only had a single vote, even if it was like a huge state. There was no way to enforce acts. And then here is a huge problem right here. 9 out of 13. So you had to have 9 out of 13 states had to agree to pass a law. And in order to change the articles, you had to have unanimous consent. Unanimous consent. I mean, how could you possibly get unanimous consent? That's basically impossible. So, and the articles also just created a firm league of friendship. So in other words, they weren't very strong, they weren't very powerful, and there was no way to enforce it. Now, we watched in class this video about Shays' Rebellion. You can click on this and watch it again if you need to. But essentially what Shays' Rebellion was, and I'll go to a slide here, was that there was a major depression, and these farmers felt like they were being treated badly. They were being put in jail for debts. But the reason they were in debt is because they had gone and fought the Revolutionary War. These were veterans. They're saying, look, this is just totally unfair. Taxes were really high. They were very frustrated. And so they began to rise up in armed rebellion. Now, Shays' Rebellion was put down by the Massachusetts government, and it ended. But the reason that we talk about it in American history is because it did something really important. It forced, or it caused George Washington to act, because George Washington became very afraid that this violence was going to spread and that our country was going to dissolve. And so it moved him towards, this rebellion highlights the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, and it caused many to say, hey, we've got to do something. We've got to have a stronger national government. And so there became this push to change, and that's why we have the Constitution today, because George Washington and many other leaders said, these articles are not working out. We've got to come up with a new system.